How's everybody? All right. We picked up 18 kids on the van this morning, which I couldn't tell you the last time that's happened on a Sunday morning. So it was absolutely awesome. So that was really cool. It's a beautiful day out there, too. Give me 1 second. Thank you, Lee. If you have your Bibles, go ahead and open to Matthew, book of Matthew, and it will be chapter 26 is where we're going to start. But a couple quick announcements. I won't take too long because we're already running a little bit behind, but the Easter extravaganza egg hunt was supposed to be yesterday. It has been moved to today at 1:30, so be out on the new property over there. So if you haven't spread the word yet and your friends and family ages 2 to 12, it'll be 1:30 right out on the new property over there. Next Sunday is Easter. There is no Sunday school next week. There'll be a sunrise service at 7:30, followed by a breakfast, and then our morning service will be at 10:30. It's crazy to think that Easter is next week, right? But which brings us to today. It's Palm Sunday. You know, it's I don't know. It's the beginning of that Holy Week. You know, the last week of Jesus' life, and I think I mentioned this a week or two ago, but it's the perfect time to like step back and just reflect. Right? Reflect at everything that Jesus went through before he died for us. All the suffering, like everything he went through. And I mean, what starts off is like, you know, a great week. There's this triumphal entry into Jerusalem. Everybody's like excited. And when you get the, you know, it's for the Palm Sunday. And then by the end of the week, by that Thursday, it kind of just takes a turn, you know, for the worse. But we have to remember that he did all that for us. Like he could have stopped that probably at any time. You know, he said, he prayed to take the suffering from him, but he said, you know, but if this is your will, so be it. But Easter is why the church exists, right? Jesus is alive today. He beat death. And that's why we celebrate Easter. And that's what it's all about. Just everything he went through and just, you know, you just can't ignore all of that. Like we know the story, what happened. You know, Jesus died. He was buried. He rose again the third day. But there's more to it than just that. Like if you literally take a step back and just go through like pretty much everything that happened that week, all he went through, and he did it because he loved us. He did it all for us. And so I'm going to give you guys some homework this morning. Yeah, I'm going to be the bad guy. But just research day by day this week. Just research what happened. Read some scriptures. Just familiarize yourself with what happened in this Holy Week. You know, to reflect on that is super, super powerful. You know, bless you. Thank you. Has anybody seen the Passion of the Christ movie? It came out, 20-some years ago now? But I remember, like, just everything leading up to the crucifixion. Like, everybody in the theater was literally in tears, right? Because you felt that emotion. I'm going to kill myself. Sorry. You felt that emotion. And that's what, like, you feel if you go through, like, this week, right, of everything he went through, all the torment he went through. So we're going to start in Matthew, and we're going to talk not necessarily about Palm Sunday, but we are going to talk about something that happened leading up to the crucifixion. But Matthew chapter 26, and we're actually going to read this same story in all four of the Gospels as well. So we're going to dive in basically to the part where Peter denied Christ, and you can see this story in all four of the Gospels, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. And it's only a couple verses, so we're going to just read through all of them, because all of them say the same thing, but all of them say it a little bit differently, so it's kind of cool to see the thing. So Matthew 26, verses 69 through 74. It says, "Now Peter sat without in the palace, and a damsel came unto him, saying, Thou also wast with Jesus of Galilee. But he denied it. He denied before them all, saying, I know not what thou sayest. And when he was gone out into the porch, another maid saw him, and said unto them that were there, This fellow was also with Jesus of Nazareth. And again he denied with an oath, I do not know the man. And after a while came unto him that they stood by, and said to Peter, Surely thou also art one of them, for thy speech bewrayeth thee. Then he began to curse and swear, saying, I know not the man. And immediately the cock crew." So go ahead and flip to Mark chapter 14. Mark chapter 14, and it's going to be in verses 66 through 72. And it says, "As Peter was beneath in the palace, there cometh one of the maids of the high priest. And when she saw Peter warming himself, she looked upon him and said, And thou also wast with Jesus of Nazareth. But he denied, saying, I know not, neither understand I what thou sayest. And he went out into the porch, and the cock crew. And the maid saw him again, and began to say to them that stood by, This is one of them. And he denied it again. And a little after, they that stood by said again to Peter, Surely thou art one of them, for thou art a Galilean, and thy speech agreeth thereto. But he began to curse and swear, saying, I know not this man of whom ye speak. And the second time the cock crew, and Peter called to mind the word that Jesus said unto him, Before the cock crow twice, thou shalt deny me thrice. And when he thought therein, he wept." Go ahead and flip to Luke. So you see how each gospel kind of tells a story a little bit differently. And I remember reading an article about that one, because if you notice, it talked about the rooster crowing twice in that one, when not the other ones. And I know some people have tried to use that to say, oh, it's a contradiction, things like that. But it's accounts from different people, right? It's all like in addition to Luke chapter 22. And it's going to be verses 55 to 62. Verse 55 says, And when they had kindled a fire in the midst of the hall and were set down together, Peter sat down among them. But a certain maid beheld him as he sat by the fire, and earnestly looked upon him, and said, This man was also with him. And he denied him, saying, Woman, I know him not. And after a little while, another saw him, and said, Thou art also of them. And Peter said, Man, I am not. And about half the space of 1 hour, after another confidently affirmed, saying, Of truth this fellow was also with him, for he is a Galilean. And Peter said, Man, I know not what thou sayest. And immediately, while he yet spake, the cock crew. And the Lord turned and looked upon Peter, and Peter remembered the word of the Lord, how he had said unto him, Before the cock crow, thou shalt deny me thrice. And Peter went out and wept bitterly. And then lastly, John chapter 18. And I'm purposely reading all four, just so you can see that everybody's telling the same story, but it's just, again, there's slight differences because it's different people's perspectives, right? John chapter 18, verses 15 through 18, and then we're going to jump down to 25 to 27. But John 18, verse 15 says, And Simon Peter followed Jesus, and so did another disciple. That disciple was known unto the high priest, and went in with Jesus into the palace of the high priest. But Peter stood at the door without. Then went out that other disciple, which was known unto the high priest, and spake unto her that kept the door, and brought in Peter. Then saith the damsel that kept the door unto Peter, Art not thou also one of this man's disciples? And he saith, I am not. And the servants' officer stood there, who had made fire of coals, for it was cold, and they warmed themselves, and Peter stood with them and warmed himself. Jump down to verse 25. It says, And Simon Peter stood and warmed himself. They said therefore unto him, Art not thou also one of his disciples? He denied it, and said, I am not. And then one of the servants of the high priest, being his kinsman, whose ear Peter cut off, saith, Did I not see thee in the garden with him? And then Peter denied again, and immediately the cock crew. So all four Gospels tell this story of Peter denying Christ. Now, remember, prior to this, Peter's like, I would never do that, right? Jesus told him that, hey, you're going to deny me. And he's like, what are you talking about? And he's like, I would never do that. He's like, even if it means dying with you, that would never, ever happen. But what happened? He did it, right? It did happen. And a little sidetrack, but I think this is a good example of how any one of us are susceptible of falling away, if you will, or slipping up, right? Peter was probably Jesus' closest disciple, and he messed up, right? So it goes to show that anybody in this room, anybody anywhere, how close you think, how strong your faith is, you're susceptible to messing up, right? If we become complacent or content, right, we can fall backwards a little bit. If you think that you're immune to any of Satan's attacks, or if you think you're never in danger of slipping up, you're wrong. It's like plain and simple. Like everybody is susceptible. You know, I saw, now when you hear the word falling away, some people can look at that as just a slip up. Some people can say, oh, they fell away and, abandoned the faith, things like that. Like everybody can take that a different way. But, Peter here was confident. He's like, even if everybody else abandons you, I'll be here. Super confident. I heard some say, well, maybe that was one of the reasons Peter kind of slipped up. Maybe he's a little prideful. Maybe he was a little self-confident. In this article I read, I thought it was kind of interesting because it said, then Peter kind of slipped up again because when Jesus went to pray in the garden, he asked Peter to stay awake. And he didn't, right? He fell asleep. Jesus came back and they fell asleep. And then they said, well, maybe another step of him kind of messing up is that when he followed Jesus, he followed from a distance. And it kind of made the connection, which it kind of clicked. It's like, how many of us, whether we come to church or not, or we follow Jesus, but how many of us are following Jesus from a distance? Right? Kind of makes you think a little bit, right? Like maybe we're doing, the bare minimum of what we have to do, or maybe I'm not sure, but like how many of us are not fully submitting, kind of like we talked about a couple weeks ago? Like we're kind of following from a distance. But why would Peter deny not even knowing him at all? Who said that? Fear, absolutely. He was scared. And we've talked about fear so many times, and fear can make us do or make us not do some things, right? Fear can kind of take over if you let it, right? But there's two things I kind of want to talk about. One is weakness, and then two is, the fear. So there's two reasons why Peter denied Christ, and partially based on weakness. And that weakness is basically born of human frailty, right? He's human. After the Last Supper, Jesus took his disciples to the Garden of Gethsemane to await his arrest, and he told the disciples to stay awake, keep watch, while he went, a little bit further ahead, and he prayed. And when he got back, he found them all sleeping. And he warned Peter to stay awake, and he said, and pray, because although his spirit might be willing, his flesh was weak. So his spirit, remember, he was probably Jesus' closest disciples. Like spiritually, he was there, but physically, I guess he was weak. And then Peter fell asleep again. But we do know that Peter learned his lesson about being watchful, and actually in 1 Peter 5:8, you don't have to turn there, but Peter says this, he says, be sober, be vigilant, because your adversary, the devil, as a roaring lion, walketh about, seeing whom he may devour. If we're weak, obviously if we're spiritually weak, it's like an opportunity, right, for Satan to kind of sneak in there, right? Or even if we're physically weak, right? Anybody ever been super tired? Yeah, we have. Okay. Anybody super tired right now? Okay. But so we've all been tired, and when you're in like that super tired state, your mind's not fully there either, right? So it's like that opportunity that it's all it needs sometimes is for like the devil to sneak his way in, or just kind of make you question things, or maybe you fear things you normally wouldn't, or just think a different way than you normally wouldn't. But Peter's weakness caused him to be devoured, I guess, if you will, momentarily, as he denied Jesus because he underestimated his own weakness, right? Anybody, I think we've all done it. Be like, oh, I'm not tired, even though you're like completely exhausted, or you're like, oh, no, I'm good. You're like, no, you're not. But fear, you guys said it right away. Fear is probably the biggest reason that Peter denied Christ. And again, we've talked about this so many times. We've talked about how fear prevents us from doing so many things, right? When we're spreading the gospel, we talked about it. I could never talk to that person because I'm afraid that I'm not going to know what to say, right? Or I'm afraid how they're going to react. So sometimes we don't do things because we're afraid of what's going to happen. And the truth is we don't know what's going to happen, right? It's like the fear of the unknown, which can be pretty bad. But Peter here was no different. But to his credit, as the other disciples fled, he did follow Jesus, as he said he would. He just kept his distance so he wouldn't be identified with him. But there's no doubt here that Peter was struggling with fear of some sort. from the courtyard, he watched Jesus being falsely accused, beaten, insulted. Peter was afraid that Jesus would die, but he was also fearful for his life too. The world hated Jesus, and Peter found that he wasn't prepared to face the ridicule and persecution that Jesus was suffering. He's like, Jesus, I would die with you. I would never abandon you. But then all of a sudden, when things started happening, what happened? He's kind of like, oh, hang on. Like, this is real, right? Earlier, Jesus warned his disciples, and it's kind of a warning for us today too, but in John 15:18, he says, well, if the world hate you, you know that it hated me before it hated you. And then Matthew 24:9 says, then they shall deliver you up to be afflicted and shall kill you, and you shall be hated of all nations for my name's sake. So Jesus has given them a warning, and again, it's the same warning for us today, is that, look, you're going to face persecution. You're going to face some sort of ridicule. And here's the thing. They did it to me too. Why would you expect not to have that happen? Right? But Peter quickly found out that he may not have been as bold and courageous as he thought he was. And I think all of us has been in a situation like that at some point, right? I saw, this is going to sound a little extreme, but I heard this question asked one time, and it made me think. And it said, if somebody had a gun to your head asking if you were a Christian or not, what would you say? Like, we could all sit here and be like, yeah, absolutely. But if we're in that situation, what would you say? Would you proudly proclaim Christ even if your life depended on it? Because here we see Peter do otherwise, right? And he was the closest to Jesus. And we may wonder, well, why did Jesus allow Peter to fail, right? Or maybe why was he allowed to deny his Lord 3 times when it was one of his followers? But flip to Luke chapter 22, back a chapter there. Luke chapter 22, verses 31 through 34. And the Lord said, Simon, Simon, he's talking about Peter, behold, Satan hath desired to have you, that he may sift you as wheat. But I have prayed for thee that thy faith fail not, and when thou art converted, strengthen thy brethren. And he said unto him, Lord, I'm ready to go with thee, both in prison and to death. And then he tells Peter, I tell thee, Peter, the cock shall not crow this day before thou shalt thrice deny that thou knowest me. So earlier, Jesus is telling Peter, hey, the devil wants to have you. He wants to sift you as wheat, as it says. So basically, Jesus is telling Peter that Satan has asked permission to kind of test your faith a little bit. Kind of sounds a lot like Job, doesn't it? But what Jesus was doing is he was equipping Peter. He was strengthening Peter. Because in verse 32, it says, hey, when they're converted, I want you to strengthen thy brethren. So he's testing Peter in a way, or he's strengthening him in so that he will have the strength to continue on and do the work that he needs to be done. And not only did Peter strengthen those other disciples, he became, the pillar of the early church in Jerusalem, telling everybody about the Lord. As with all of our failures, God used Peter's many failures, including those denials, for so many good things. And again, that's how much God loves us. Like even if we slip up, we talked about this past couple of weeks, God's still standing there waiting for us to come back. And if we go through bad things, it's for a reason, right? We can learn from those things. And in this case, it says when the rooster crowed, Peter just cried instantly because he remembered what Jesus told him. But yet, Peter wasn't perfect, right? And actually, if you look through the Bible, any of the people that God used or Jesus used were not perfect people, right? Or what society would consider perfect, I guess, right? Like his disciples, fishermen, tax collectors, right? People on the bottom of the social ladder, if you will. But we're all human. We've all messed up. But when we mess up, God is there to bring us back and strengthen our faith, right? If we're going through a trial, our faith should get stronger because we're supposed to rely on him. You know, after his resurrection, after Peter denied him 3 times, I guess, did Jesus just like wash his hands and just walk away from Peter? Like, I thought you were my closest friend, but you acted like you didn't know me. Talk to you later, right? Did he do that? No. After his resurrection, he forgave Peter. Forgiveness. He forgave him. And he actually asked him, hey, do you love me? How many times? 3 times. So he asked him, do you love me? And Peter's like, I love you. Do you think it crossed Peter's mind that he denied him 3 times and now Jesus is asking him 3 times? Like, do you love me? Jesus was able to use Peter for so many great things. Even though he denied him 3 times publicly, right? He said he didn't even know him. Not only was he not with him, but he's like, I don't even know the man. Yeah. Yep. Absolutely. Because again, we're all susceptible to it. Right? None of us in here are immune. Yeah. Absolutely. Yeah. So we just have to keep our faith strong, right? Keep our faith strong. Now, we're all human. We're going to slip up, but keep your faith strong. And again, Jesus, went through so much torment and suffering this week. He died, got crucified for us. So please take the time, research what happened, the events of this week. It's powerful stuff. And that's why we're here, right? The gospel. Yes, ma'am.
It's funny that we're talking about this because I was just talking to the pastor earlier this morning, telling him I have the Prime Video.
Okay.
And I came across the show The Bible. And when I saw how much agony they put Jesus through, I literally, in my own home, fell to my knees and I was in tears because it just broke my heart that how much agony he went through for me and for everybody else.
Yeah.
And he did it willingly.
Yep. That's why I said it's easy to sit here and just say, oh, yeah, Jesus died for us. But, when you really reflect on what he did and what he went through.
I heard something on Christian radio this week, 94.5, and it has really struck me and left a memory. I always look forward to Holy Week, which is coming up. It's
Sure.
my favorite. And I get so excited, just like a little kid still. But what they said on Christian radio was the death that Christ went through, as she said, was, yes, humiliating and excruciating. And they said, on record, there is one man that had that death inflicted on him, and it took him 9 days to die.
Wow.
So that shows that, everything goes on time with our Christ.
Yeah. Yeah, God's got a plan for everything, right? I'm about out of time here, but you reminded me, you were mentioning Amazon Video, but have you seen a trailer for the movie The King of Kings yet? Have you seen that trailer? It's an animated movie. I think it came out Thursday, the 11th. And I've seen 3 different trailers for it so far, and it actually looks really good. It's an animated story, I guess, of Jesus. It has, him feeding the 5,000 and, all of this stuff and getting crucified. But look it up if you haven't seen it. The trailers look really good. Has anybody seen it, the trailers? Just a couple people? Okay. Look it up. It's called The King of Kings. It just came out, Thursday. But anyway, let's pray. Lord, thank you for today. Just thank you for just the group we have here this morning. Just thank you for all the kids we were able to pick up this morning and just to come and just have fun learning about you. And Lord, we do pray that all of our faith is strong. Lord, that we can just do what we need to do every single day to keep our faith strong, to resist the attacks. And we just thank you for dying for us. And just can't ever thank you enough for that. We ask that you bless Pastor Steve's message to follow this morning. Lift us up in your name.